I can still hear the sound of the officers lifting that bed. The wood frame creaked, the mattress scraped across the floor, and in that moment, time stood still. I remember clutching my grandson Ethan's hand, my heart pounding in my chest, afraid to look but unable to turn away. For 2 weeks, my son Daniel hadn't answered my calls. 2 weeks of silence, 2 weeks of me staring at a phone that never lit up with his name. I thought maybe he was busy, maybe tired, maybe too wrapped up in work and family life to pick up. But standing in his house that night, watching something shift in the shadows under Ethan's bed, I realized I hadn't been prepared for the truth at all. Because what we found beneath that bed didn't just shake me, it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. It raised questions I still can't answer. Why didn't Daniel pick up the phone? What was happening inside his home while I sat miles away, folding laundry, cooking dinner, convincing myself everything was fine? And why, when I finally got to the house, did my 7-year-old grandson whisper with tears in his eyes, "Grandma, don't look under the bed"? That whisper still haunts me. It was more than fear, it was warning, pleading, as if Ethan already knew what I was about to see. I've replayed that night over and over. The unanswered calls, the drive to Daniel and Rachel's quiet neighborhood, the way their blinds were shut tight when I pulled into the driveway, my hand trembling on the doorknob. And finally, the moment the police lifted the bed and exposed what had been hidden there all along. Betrayal, secrets, heartbreak, a silence that spoke louder than words ever could. And yes, a revenge that none of them saw coming. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. Too many people go through heartbreak in silence, and your one click helps share stories that deserve to be heard. When the police finally lifted that bed, I understood why my heart had been uneasy for weeks. But the truth is, the nightmare didn't begin that night. It began quietly, in the silence of unanswered calls, in the small gaps of everyday life that turned into 2 weeks of worry. It started with one call to my son Daniel. He didn't pick up. I thought nothing of it at first. He was a busy man. 34 years old, a husband, a father, a man building his life with his wife Rachel and their little boy, Ethan. I figured he was tied up at work, or maybe the phone battery had died. But then, one day turned into 3, 3 became 5, and suddenly I was staring at my phone like it was holding a secret I couldn't reach. I would set the phone on the kitchen counter while I cooked dinner. I'd stir a pot of chicken noodle soup, glance at the screen, and wait for his name to flash. Nothing. I'd fold laundry in the living room, stacking towels into neat piles, my phone sitting right there next to me. Silent. Nights were the hardest. I'd crawl into bed, open our old text messages, scroll through his last words, "Talk soon, Mom." That message began to feel like a lie, a hollow promise that only deepened my fear. Neighbors noticed too. On one of my evening walks, Mrs. Porter from across the street stopped me. "Heard from Daniel lately?" she asked. Her smile was warm, but her eyes lingered, curious. I forced a laugh. "Oh, you know him. Probably drowning in work." But as I walked away, her words rang in my ears. If even the neighbors were asking, maybe the silence wasn't just in my head. I left voicemails. At first they were casual. "Hey Daniel, just checking in. Call me back." Then they turned shaky. "Daniel, it's been a week. Are you okay? Please, let me know something." By the second week, I was pleading. "Son, it's me. I don't care if you're busy. Just let me hear your voice." Each time, I'd hang up and stare at the phone, the empty line pressing against my chest like a weight. Even Rachel, his wife, didn't answer when I tried her number. That part scared me more. Rachel wasn't the type to ignore calls, especially mine. Sometimes she'd even pick up while wrangling Ethan at the park, laughing as she tried to keep him from running too far. But now, her silence matched Daniel's. The house that once echoed with their voices felt like a black hole. Every corner of my daily life reminded me of them. I'd see a jar of peanut butter and remember how Ethan smeared it on everything when he visited, giggling through sticky hands. I'd pass Daniel's old trophies lined up in the hallway and think about how proud he'd been, how I used to clap the loudest at his games. I'd fold a shirt that reminded me of Rachel's Christmas gifts, her careful wrapping and bright bows. All those pieces of them surrounded me, but the people themselves, gone. I thought about driving out sooner. But I told myself not to overreact, not to be the overbearing mother Daniel always teased me about. "Mom, you worry too much," he'd say with that half smile. So I tried to believe that. Until the 15th day. That morning, I woke up, checked my phone, and saw nothing again. The emptiness felt different that day, heavier, like the silence itself was daring me to act. So I packed a small overnight bag, just a few things: my toothbrush, a change of clothes, my phone charger. I told myself it was just in case, though part of me knew this wasn't going to be a casual visit. I locked my front door, stood on the porch for a moment, and looked around at the quiet street I'd lived on for years. My life had always been steady, predictable, built on routines and little comforts. But as I slid behind the wheel of my car, I knew that steadiness was about to crack. The drive to Daniel's house in Columbus took just over an hour. Suburban streets stretched around me, familiar landscapes giving way to highways lined with autumn trees, their leaves burning orange and red. I tried to distract myself with the radio, but every song seemed to echo my thoughts, memories of Daniel as a boy, Rachel's laughter, Ethan's small hand gripping mine. My knuckles tightened around the wheel. As I turned into their neighborhood, everything looked picture perfect. Rows of tidy lawns, mailboxes lined up in neat order, families pulling into driveways after work. But when I saw Daniel's house, a chill ran through me. Both cars were in the driveway, the blinds were drawn tight. A faint glow of light seeped through the curtains, but there was no movement, no sign of life. I parked at the curb, cut the engine, and sat in silence. My heart raced as my eyes fixed on that front door. I reached for my bag, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the walkway. Each step felt like I was walking into something I couldn't undo. I had no idea then that the silence in that house wasn't just absence, it was a warning. And when I finally turned the knob and stepped inside, the quiet that greeted me was heavier than any words I'd ever heard. As I pulled into the driveway of Daniel's house, something struck me right away: the grass. Daniel was never the type to let his yard go. He used to take pride in it, mowing every Saturday, lining the edges just so, even teaching Ethan how to rake the leaves into neat piles. But now, the grass was long, patches of weeds poked up along the walkway, and leaves littered the front porch as though no one had touched it in weeks. Then I saw the mailbox. The metal door hung slightly open, stuffed with envelopes that had clearly been piling up. Bills, flyers, even what looked like a small package wedged inside. My stomach tightened. 2 weeks of silence, and not even the mail had been touched. Why didn't Daniel even pick up the bills? I stepped closer, the air feeling heavier with every step. The blinds were still drawn, curtains pulled shut against the sunlight, leaving the house looking like it was bracing itself for something. Both cars were in the driveway. Daniel's silver sedan and Rachel's white SUV parked like they always were, side by side. But the house felt abandoned, like a shell with life stripped from it. I climbed the steps, hesitated for a moment at the front door, then knocked. Once. Twice. My knuckles tapped against the wood, echoing in the silence. No footsteps, no voices. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, it turned easily. The moment I stepped inside, a strange smell met me. Not foul exactly, but something off. A mix of stale air, unwashed dishes, and something sharper I couldn't place. It was the smell of a home that had been left too long without care, a house that had stopped being lived in the way it once was. The living room was dim, blinds pulled tight. Toys were scattered across the rug. Ethan's action figures, a Lego set half built on the coffee table. The TV remote sat on the couch cushion, abandoned mid-use. And yet, there was no sound, no laughter, no footsteps, only the hum of the refrigerator in the background. I called out softly, "Daniel?" My voice felt too loud in that silence. No answer. "Rachel?" Still nothing. As I moved deeper into the house, I felt a strange pull in my chest, that mother's instinct whispering that something wasn't right. My eyes swept over every detail: the dishes piled in the sink, some with food dried onto the plates, a jacket tossed carelessly on the floor, a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter. This wasn't the home I knew. And then I saw him, Ethan, my sweet grandson, sitting at the kitchen table, his small hands moving a crayon slowly across a piece of paper. His little legs dangled from the chair, not quite reaching the floor. At first, relief washed over me. I nearly called his name out loud, ready to run to him, but something stopped me. He didn't look up. He didn't run into my arms like he usually did. Instead, he sat quietly, shoulders hunched, his face pale. I walked closer, my voice soft. "Ethan, sweetheart, it's Grandma." His crayon froze mid-stroke. He looked up at me then, his eyes wide, not with the joy I expected, but with something else, something uncertain, almost scared. His voice was low when he spoke. "Daddy said, not to open the door for you." The words cut through me. Not to open the door for me? Daniel had told his son that? Why? Why keep me away? I bent down slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, Ethan. I just wanted to see you. Where's your mom and dad?" He glanced toward the hallway, then back at me, his lips pressing into a thin line. They said, "Don't tell." That chill that had been sitting at the edge of my worry now sank deep into my bones. I knew children sometimes repeated things without meaning, but there was something in his tone, something in the way his little hands gripped the crayon tighter, that told me these weren't just random words. He had been told to keep something secret. I wanted to press him, to ask more, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to scare him. I brushed his hair gently back from his forehead. "You're safe, baby. Grandma's here." But inside, I felt the sting of betrayal. My own son Daniel had warned Ethan against me. Against me, his mother, the woman who had raised him, who had held his hand through every scrape, every heartbreak, every victory. Why? What was he hiding? I stood slowly, my eyes sweeping the house again, this time sharper, more alert. That smell still lingered in the air, heavier now. Something was off in this home, more than just the silence, more than just the clutter. It was like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to notice what was wrong. And as Ethan went back to his drawing, his small shoulders hunched over the table, I realized this wasn't just worry anymore. This was fear, my fear and his. And whatever Daniel and Rachel were keeping from me, it was big enough to make a little boy whisper warnings and draw pictures at a kitchen table in silence. I tried to steady myself in the kitchen, pretending to be calm for Ethan's sake, but every detail around me screamed that something was off. I walked to the sink and set down my bag, trying to distract my hands by washing a few dishes stacked high. When I turned on the faucet, the smell of old food hit me. Plates with dried spaghetti, glasses stained with juice rings, and silverware sticky with sauces, things Rachel would never have let sit. She was meticulous, almost proud of her kitchen. But this room looked abandoned, neglected, as if no one cared anymore. As I rinsed one of the plates, my eyes fell to a carton on the counter. A half-eaten box of Chinese takeout, the rice hardened at the edges, sat open with chopsticks still sticking out. Next to it, a greasy bag from a local pizza place I recognized, crumpled and forgotten. Rachel was a healthy eater, always making home-cooked meals for Ethan. She would have never left half-spoiled takeout lying around for days. I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at the counter where a stack of unopened envelopes Saturday. Some were bills, others were letters, and one had a red final notice stamped across it. My throat tightened. Daniel had never been careless with money. He used to pay bills the moment they arrived, priding himself on keeping everything in order. Why leave them unopened? Why let them pile up until the warnings came? I moved slowly through the kitchen, my eyes scanning each corner as though the house itself was begging me to pay attention. That's when I saw it draped carelessly over the back of a chair. A sweater. At first, I thought it was Rachel's, but when I picked it up, the scent hit me. Perfume. Sweet, floral, and unfamiliar. I turned the tag over in my fingers, different brand than Rachel ever wore. The sweater was a size smaller than hers, and the style wasn't something I had ever seen Rachel put on. She had her own taste, her own wardrobe. This belonged to someone else. My heart raced. My son's home, his marriage, his family. It all suddenly felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. Who did this sweater belong to? Why was it here, in plain sight, in a house that was supposed to be shared only between Daniel, Rachel, and Ethan? I set it down, my mind spinning. For a moment, anger rose in my chest, not just at Daniel, but at the thought of being shut out. I was his mother. I had been there through every scraped knee, every late-night study session, every heartbreak he ever had. I had lifted him, loved him, and carried him more than once when the world felt heavy. And now, in the home that was supposed to be safe, I was standing among secrets I wasn't meant to see. Why? Why was I being shut out of his life like a stranger? Behind me, I heard Ethan's voice, soft and trembling. "Grandma." I turned. He had stopped coloring, his little hands gripping the edge of the table. His eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me. Don't look in Daddy's room." His words cut sharper than any knife. I forced myself to stay calm, to not let the panic show. I smiled weakly and walked back toward him, brushing his hair back with my hand. "Why not, sweetheart?" I asked softly. He shook his head quickly, his lips pressing together, refusing to answer. Then he hunched over his paper again, pressing the crayon hard enough that it snapped in half. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. "Don't look in Daddy's room." That was no random phrase. Children don't say things like that unless they've been told to, or unless they've seen something they wish they hadn't. The sweater, the bills, the untouched mail, the food left to rot. And now, Ethan's warning. Each piece was falling into place, and none of it made sense together. My son Daniel, the boy I raised, was hiding something from me, and he had gone as far as to train his own child to keep me away from the truth. A chill crawled up my spine. I thought about Rachel. Where was she? Why hadn't she answered my calls either? Why wasn't she here now, in the middle of this chaos, protecting her son, protecting herself? I turned toward the hallway, my feet heavier than stone. The air seemed thicker there, colder, as though whatever was behind that door carried weight enough to crush us all. And though my grandson's whisper echoed in my ears, warning me to stay away, I knew I couldn't. I was his mother. I couldn't ignore what was hiding inside Daniel's life. And step by step, I moved closer to the door Ethan had told me not to open. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body lay on the couch, but my mind was restless, every nerve on edge. The silence in Daniel's house wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, heavy, filled with unspoken truths that clawed at me. I kept staring at the ceiling, my ears straining for every sound. It was past midnight when I heard it. A faint noise, so soft I thought I might have imagined it. A shuffle, like fabric dragging against wood, coming from Ethan's room. My chest tightened. I sat up slowly, holding my breath, listening again. There it was, a whisper of movement, something alive, something deliberate. Fear and instinct clashed inside me. I couldn't ignore it. I tiptoed down the hallway, each floorboard creaking like it wanted to betray me. When I reached Ethan's door, I pushed it open gently. He was asleep, curled up with his stuffed bear, his breathing steady. But the sound was still there, faint, coming from beneath his bed. For a moment, I froze. My hands trembled so badly I had to press them against the doorframe to keep steady. My mind conjured every horror imaginable: an intruder, a stranger lurking, a nightmare come to life. I crouched down slowly, my knees aching, and peered into the shadowy space beneath. I couldn't see clearly, just a blur of movement. Something shifted in the darkness. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. My breath came out shallow, uneven. I tried to whisper Ethan's name, to wake him without frightening him, but the words caught in my throat. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, dialing with fumbling fingers. 911. What's your emergency? My voice cracked as I whispered into the receiver. There's someone under my grandson's bed. The operator tried to keep me calm, telling me to stay quiet, to get to safety, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't leave Ethan. My body was trembling so hard that the phone nearly slipped from my hand. Within minutes, though, they felt like hours. I saw the flicker of red and blue lights through the window. The police arrived, their footsteps steady, their presence filling the house with a cold authority. They moved into Ethan's room with careful precision, flashlights cutting through the shadows. I stood, clutching the doorframe, whispering prayers I hadn't spoken in years. One of the officers bent down, his gloved hand reaching under the bed. The other kept his weapon drawn, waiting. The silence was unbearable. I pressed my knuckles to my lips to stop myself from screaming. Then movement. When they pulled back, the blanket hanging low, the light revealed something I never expected. Not a stranger, not an intruder, but Rachel, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were wide, her face streaked with tears, her body bruised in places I could see even in the dim light. She wasn't attacking. She wasn't hiding to hurt anyone. She was cowering, terrified. Her whole body shook, as if even the air in the room could break her. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, her voice cracking as though it hadn't been used in days. "Please don't let him know I'm here." Time stopped. My knees buckled, and I caught myself against the wall. The officers helped her out carefully, speaking softly, assuring her she was safe, but her eyes kept darting toward the hallway, toward Daniel's room. That's when the truth crashed over me. All those unanswered calls, the silence, the abandoned kitchen, the unopened mail, the sweater, the warning from Ethan, none of it was random. Daniel hadn't lost Rachel. She hadn't left him. She had been here all along, hidden, trapped, too afraid to reach out. And my son, my Daniel, had been the one to do this. The boy I raised, the man I thought I knew, had turned into a stranger capable of cruelty so dark I could barely comprehend it. He had made me believe his wife walked out, that she had abandoned her family, while in reality he had broken her spirit, isolated her, and shoved her into the shadows of her own home. He had taught his own son to keep secrets, to guard the silence of abuse. I stared at Rachel, my throat tight, my chest heavy. She looked at me with a kind of desperation I had never seen in anyone before, as though she was silently begging me not to leave her again, not to believe the lies anymore. In that moment, betrayal burned through me, not from her, not from anyone else, but from the child I had given life to. Daniel had lied to me, used my trust as a shield for his sins, and as much as it broke me, I knew there was no undoing what I had just witnessed. I was a mother, torn in two. The son I loved had become the monster hiding in plain sight, and the woman I thought was gone had been screaming silently beneath our noses, waiting for someone to see her. And now, I had to decide. Would I protect my son from the consequences of his choices? Or would I finally stand for the truth, no matter how much it shattered the family I thought I had? Because what I saw under that bed was more than just Rachel. It was the truth I could never unsee, and the betrayal I could never forgive. The flashing lights outside cast shadows across the living room walls, the quiet hum of police radios filling the air. I stood frozen, clutching Ethan to my chest, his little body trembling against me. My heart was still hammering from the discovery under that bed, when the sound of tires crunching over gravel pierced the silence. Headlights swept across the window, and I knew instantly it was Daniel. My son was home. Every muscle in my body went rigid. For a split second, I almost wished time would stop, that somehow we could remain in this suspended state where the truth had been revealed but the confrontation hadn't yet come. But life doesn't grant such pauses. The front door creaked open, and there he was, Daniel, my boy, the child I had raised, standing in the entryway with confusion painted across his face. The officers turned, their hands steady, their voices firm. "Sir, we need you to stay right where you are." Daniel's eyes darted around the room, his gaze landing on me, then on Rachel standing behind the officers, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. For the first time, his calm mask faltered. His face drained of color, and his jaw tightened. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his tone sharp, defensive. "Why are the police in my house?" Rachel stepped forward slightly, her voice shaking but determined. "They're here because of you, Daniel. Because of what you've done to me. What you've done to Ethan." The words sliced through the air, heavy and undeniable. I looked at her, my heart shattering at the sight of her trembling, but standing. Her courage in that moment was something I could never forget. Daniel's eyes widened, then narrowed. He tried to laugh, a hollow, bitter sound. "This is insane. She's lying. She's always been unstable, you know that, Mom. She's trying to turn you against me." My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to cling to the version of my son I had always known. The boy who played catch in the backyard, who hugged me at graduations, who promised me he'd take care of his family. But the evidence was all around me, the bruises on Rachel's arms, the fear in Ethan's eyes, the sweater, the silence, the lies. I whispered, almost to myself, "I raised him. How could my own son turn into a monster?" Ethan buried his face into my shoulder, clutching at me with small, desperate hands. His voice came out in a whisper that broke me completely. "Grandma, don't let Daddy hurt Mommy again." Those words were like a dagger, innocent, pleading, and far too heavy for a child his age to carry. Rachel spoke again, her voice steadier this time, fueled by years of pain finally spilling into the open. She told the officers about the years of control, how Daniel isolated her, cut her off from friends, made her believe she had nowhere else to go. She explained how he hid her away, convincing everyone, including me, that she had simply left. The nights of fear, the threats, the constant weight of his manipulation, it all poured out like a confession she had been holding back for far too long. I listened, numb, each detail slamming into me with the force of a hammer. My son, my Daniel, had been orchestrating this darkness right under my nose. He hadn't just fooled the neighbors, or Rachel's family, or his co-workers. He had fooled me, his own mother. When the officers asked her why she hadn't come forward sooner, Rachel glanced at Ethan, her eyes brimming with tears. Because he said he'd take my son from me if I ever tried. And I believed him. My knees weakened, and I sank into the nearest chair, Ethan still clinging to me. I couldn't reconcile the man standing in the doorway with the child I once knew. I searched his face for any trace of remorse, any flicker of humanity. But all I saw was anger. Anger at being caught, at losing control. "Mom," he said, his voice hard, almost a growl. "You can't believe her. After everything I've done for this family, you're going to stand there and take her side?" I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. For years, I had defended him, trusted him, believed in him. But now, the truth was laid bare, undeniable. I could no longer shield myself from it. "I don't have to take anyone's side, Daniel," I whispered, my voice breaking. "The truth is standing right in front of me, and I can't unsee it." The officers stepped forward, their presence heavy with finality. One of them told him he was being detained for questioning, that they had reason to believe serious crimes had taken place. Daniel's face twisted in disbelief, his eyes darting back to me as if I held the power to undo it all. But for the first time in my life, I didn't move to protect him. I held Ethan tighter, feeling his small heartbeat against mine, and I looked at Rachel, who finally seemed to breathe freely. This was no longer about my loyalty as a mother. It was about protecting those who had been silenced for too long. As they led Daniel toward the door, he twisted back, his voice sharp, almost frantic. "Mom, don't let them do this. You know me, you raised me. Tell them she's lying." But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen the bruises, heard the whispers, lived through the silence. The boy I raised was gone, and the man left behind had destroyed everything he touched. As the door shut behind him, the house fell into a stillness that felt both devastating and liberating. Rachel collapsed into a chair, sobbing, while Ethan finally loosened his grip and looked up at me with tired, trusting eyes. In that moment, I understood the depth of betrayal more than I ever had in my life. My son had hidden the truth, weaponized love, and used silence as his shield. But now, the silence was broken. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I could never go back to who I was before this night. The days after Daniel's arrest moved like a storm I couldn't escape, each hour pulling me deeper into a reality I had never imagined for myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a mother. I was a witness, a protector, and in some ways, a judge. The boy I had raised was now a man accused of destroying the very family he had sworn to protect. And I had to decide which role I would play. The mother who stood blindly by his side, or the woman who finally chose to speak for those he had silenced. Rachel met with the detectives first, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. She laid out every detail of the abuse, the isolation, the threats, the way he had hidden her from the world. When she finished, the room fell quiet, the officers writing notes with grim expressions, and then they turned to me. They asked me what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had ignored. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My son's face flashed before my eyes, the toddler chasing fireflies in the backyard, the teenager walking across the stage at graduation, the young father holding Ethan for the first time. But then I looked at Rachel, bruised and broken but finally standing tall. I looked at Ethan, whose wide, tired eyes begged for safety, for truth, and I knew my answer. I told them everything. The unanswered calls, the unopened mail, the sweater that didn't belong, the whispers from Ethan. The night I heard movement under the bed and found Rachel hidden there like a ghost in her own home. When I finished, the silence was heavier than any words. One of the officers nodded, and I knew I had done what was right. I had spoken not for Daniel, but for Rachel, for Ethan, for myself. Word traveled fast. In small towns and suburban neighborhoods, secrets have a way of unraveling faster than you think. Within days, Daniel's colleagues at the insurance firm where he worked whispered behind closed doors. His manager, a man who had once praised him as dependable and trustworthy, now looked at him with disgust. The man they thought was a model employee was suddenly revealed as someone entirely different. And then came the community. The neighbors who had waved to him as he mowed the lawn, the church members who had shaken his hand every Sunday morning, they all learned the truth. At first, it was disbelief, shock. But as Rachel's testimony spread and my words echoed through the courtroom, disbelief gave way to outrage. Rachel's parents, who had always struggled to trust Daniel, were there when she took the stand. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, their eyes never leaving him. They had once thought I was the blind enabler, the mother who would always cover for her son. But when I raised my hand, swore on the Bible, and spoke the truth about my own child, I saw something shift in their faces. They didn't thank me not right away, but I could see respect in their eyes, a recognition that I had chosen justice over blood. The humiliation came swiftly for Daniel. Neighbors stopped answering his calls. Friends cut ties. His name was dragged through the local paper, headlines exposing the charges, the testimonies, the betrayal. The same man who once walked into barbecues with confidence now sat alone in a courtroom, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. And me? I sat on the other side, holding Rachel's hand in mine, Ethan curled against my shoulder. My heart broke with every word spoken, every accusation confirmed. It is a strange thing to love someone and condemn them at the same time, to feel grief and strength in the same breath. But I had made my choice. I was no longer the mother who shielded her son from consequence. I was the woman who stood for truth, even when it tore my heart apart. When Daniel's sentence was read, the room was silent. Years behind bars, stripped of the reputation he had built, cast out not just by the law, but by the community that once embraced him. And that was the revenge. Not screaming, not violence, not a dramatic act of rage. It was quiet, unshakable truth. It was watching his world crumble, not by my lies, but by his own actions exposed under the light. I walked out of that courthouse with Rachel beside me and Ethan holding my hand. The air felt different, heavy still with grief, but lighter with freedom. I knew the whispers in the grocery store aisles would follow me, that some would blame me for testifying against my own son. But deep inside, I felt a strength I had never known. Silent revenge is not always about destroying someone. It is about choosing not to let them destroy anyone else. And for me, that was enough. When the trial ended and the sentence was set, silence filled the spaces that had once been occupied by Daniel's presence. The house felt emptier, but also safer. Rachel and Ethan moved in with me for a while. Their suitcases stacked neatly in my spare room, their laughter tentative at first, as if they were relearning how to exist without fear. At night, I would hear Rachel softly humming in the kitchen while she washed dishes, Ethan sitting at the table coloring, his small hands no longer trembling the way they used to. It was strange how quickly ordinary things became extraordinary once they returned. The sound of a child's giggle, the smell of pancakes on a Saturday morning, the simple act of unlocking a door without dread. All of it felt like pieces of normal life stitched carefully back together. But I also knew we weren't the same people we had been. I wasn't the naive mother who thought unanswered calls meant busy days. Rachel wasn't the silenced wife hidden behind closed doors. Ethan wasn't just a boy with whispers trapped in his throat. We had been changed, scarred, but also strengthened by what we endured together. There were moments I sat alone in the quiet of my room, staring at old photographs of Daniel. His smile in those pictures haunted me because I kept asking myself if I had missed the signs all along. Had the seeds of cruelty been there when he was a child? Or had something along the way twisted him into a man I could no longer recognize? Those questions never truly left me. Weeks later, a letter arrived. The envelope was marked with the seal of the correctional facility. My hands shook as I held it, my name written in Daniel's handwriting. Inside, he begged for forgiveness. He wrote about how prison walls had made him reflect, about how he claimed to regret everything, about how he wanted another chance when he got out. I sat at the kitchen table, Rachel across from me, Ethan asleep down the hall. I read every word, and with each sentence, I felt the weight of manipulation all over again. It wasn't apology, it was desperation. It wasn't love, it was control, wrapped in ink. I folded the letter slowly, placed it back in the envelope, and without a single word, I struck a match. I held the flame until the paper caught, curling and blackening in my hands. I set it in the sink, watched the ashes scatter, and when the smoke faded, I felt a release I hadn't known I was waiting for. That was my final act of silent revenge. Not screaming at him, not answering his pleas, not letting his words poison the air of my home ever again. I chose silence, not the silence he had used to control, but a silence of my own making, one that gave me peace. Rachel and I built something new together. She found work again, her confidence returning one day at a time. Ethan started playing baseball in the local league, his laughter echoing across the field. And me, I finally understood the strength of women who survive betrayal, abuse, and heartbreak. We don't just endure, we rebuild. We protect. We rise stronger than before. I went looking for my son. Instead, I found the truth and the courage to protect the family he tried to destroy. If you're still watching this, it means this story touched you. Don't just click away, give this video a like, subscribe, and share it so more people can hear what families really go through behind closed doors. And please drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I truly want to know how far this story reaches.